There's a version of you that exists only in silence. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence beneath your thoughts. Most people never meet this version. They spend their entire lives talking. The weight we carry, you wake up, and within seconds, the voice begins. What do I need to do today? Did I say the right thing yesterday? Am I enough? Am I falling behind? It's exhausting, isn't it? This constant commentary. This inner lawyer building cases, this inner critic passing judgments, this inner storyteller spinning narratives about who you are and who you should be. We call this the ego. But the ego is not some villain in your psyche. It's not evil. It's just loud. Desperately loud. Like a radio that's been left on for so long you've forgotten what silence sounds like. The ego survives on noise. It feeds on comparison, on memory, on anticipation. It cannot exist in the present moment because the present moment has no story. The ego needs a past to regret and a future to fear. Without these, it begins to fade. Think about the last time you were truly quiet. Not just physically silent, but mentally still. Maybe it was watching the ocean, or holding someone you love, or lost in a moment of beauty so complete that thought itself paused. In that moment, who were you? Without your story, without your achievements, without your wounds and your worries, who remained? That's what we're afraid of. Not the ego's presence, but its absence. We're terrified of what we'll find when the noise stops. Will there be anything there at all? The mystics knew this fear. The Sufis called the ego the nafs, the self that veils the truth. Not because it's malicious, but because it's consumed with its own survival. It wraps itself in identities like armor. I am successful. I am struggling. I am misunderstood. I am special. All of these are just costumes the ego wears to feel real. But here's what most people miss. The ego doesn't disappear when it gets quiet. It doesn't die. It simply stops pretending to be the whole of who you are. Imagine you've been living in a house your entire life, believing the house is you. The rooms, the furniture, the creaking stairs, all of it feels like your identity. Then one day, you step outside. The house is still there. It hasn't vanished. But you realize, I am not the house. I am the one who can step in and out. That's what happens when the ego gets quiet. You don't lose yourself. You find the part of you that's been watching all along. The awareness beneath the noise. The consciousness before the thought. The witness who's been present through every chapter of your life, unchanged. This is not philosophy for philosophy's sake. This is a lived truth that changes everything. Because when the ego gets quiet, you stop defending positions you don't even believe in. You stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen. You stop building monuments to a self that was always just a collection of passing thoughts. And in that space, that open, vulnerable, luminous space, life becomes something entirely different. Not better necessarily, just real. The ancient Zen masters had a practice. When a student came asking for enlightenment, for peace, for truth, the master would sometimes sit in complete silence. For hours. The student would grow restless, uncomfortable, desperate for instruction. Finally, the master would speak. You already have what you seek, but you're making too much noise to hear it. We are all making too much noise. The ego isn't your enemy. It's just a part of you that learned to survive by controlling, by categorizing, by creating a story of separation. Me versus the world. My pain versus their joy. My success versus their judgment. But separation is exhausting. And the ego knows this, even if it won't admit it. So it builds walls. It develops personalities. It collects credentials and wounds and opinions. Anything to prove I am here. I am real. I matter. And you do matter, profoundly. But not because of the story. You matter because you are a fragment of consciousness experiencing itself. You matter because you are the universe looking back at itself with curious eyes. The ego can't comprehend this. It's too simple, too immediate. The ego wants complexity, wants achievement, wants proof. But the truth doesn't need proof. It just is. When the ego gets quiet, even for a moment, you taste this truth. Not as an idea, but as a felt sense, a recognition. Like coming home to a place you never left. Most people have touched this silence and didn't recognize it. It happens in moments of complete absorption, creating art, making love, standing beneath stars so vast they silence every thought. In those moments, you're not thinking about yourself. You're not performing. You're not even you. In the way you usually mean, you're just present, alive, awake. And it feels like relief, like setting down a weight you didn't know you were carrying. The poet Rumi wrote, "Silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation." This isn't mystical nonsense. It's pointing to something you already know. Deep down, beneath the stories and strategies, you know that the best moments of your life happen when you stop trying to control them, when you stop narrating them, when you simply let yourself be. The ego fights this with every weapon it has. It says, but if I'm not constantly thinking, planning, protecting, everything will fall apart. Will it though? Or is it possible that life has been moving through you all along and the ego's frantic management has been unnecessary? That the heart beats without your instruction, that breath flows without your permission, that perhaps, just perhaps, consciousness itself is far wiser than the stories you tell about it. This is the invitation hiding in every moment of silence. Not to abandon the ego, not to transcend the self, but to recognize that you are larger than the noise, that the voice in your head is not the totality of who you are. There is a you that exists before thought, a you that will remain after the last thought fades, a you that has been quietly watching, patiently present through every triumph and tragedy of your life. When the ego gets quiet, that you finally gets a chance to speak. And what it says is simpler than anything the ego could imagine. You are already whole. You always have been. The stories we tell. The ego is not a thing. It's a process. A continuous act of storytelling, so seamless you mistake it for reality. Every morning, you wake up and reassemble yourself. You gather the fragments, memories, roles, relationships, regrets, and construct a person. This is who I am. This is what happened to me. This is where I'm going. And it feels so solid, so true. But have you noticed? The person you are with your parents is not quite the person you are with your friends. The you that exists at work wears a different face than the you that exists alone at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, wondering who you really are beneath all the performances. The ego is a shape shifter. It molds itself to every situation, every relationship, every expectation. And then it insists, this is the real me. But which one? The philosopher Alan Watts described the ego as a social institution. We learn to be a separate self the way we learn language, through imitation, through consensus, through the need to navigate a world that demands, who are you? And so we answer. We create a character. We give it a name, a history, a set of preferences and aversions. We defend it. We promote it. We spend entire lifetimes trying to prove its worth. But to whom? Here's the uncomfortable truth: most of what you call yourself is borrowed. Your beliefs came from somewhere. Your fears were learned. Your desires were shaped by 1,000 invisible influences: culture, family, media, the endless comparison machine of modern life. Even your sense of uniqueness, your conviction that you are fundamentally different from everyone else, that too is a pattern the ego runs. The Sufis understood this deeply. They spoke of the false self not because the personality is evil, but because it's provisional, temporary. A mask worn so long it fused to the face. And the tragedy is this: we suffer not because the mask is there, but because we believe we are the mask. When someone criticizes you, why does it hurt? Not because they're attacking your body. Your body doesn't care about opinions. They're attacking the story, the carefully constructed narrative of who you believe yourself to be. And the ego responds as if its life depends on defending that story, because it does. The ego's existence is entirely dependent on your belief in it. The moment you stop feeding it attention, it begins to dissolve, not into nothing, but into what it always was: a useful tool, a linguistic convention, a way of navigating the world, but not the totality of your being. This is why meditation can feel so threatening at first. You sit down to be still, and immediately the mind explodes with noise. Thoughts multiply, anxieties amplify. The ego, sensing danger, throws everything it has at you. What am I doing? This is pointless. I have so much to do. Did I lock the door? What will they think of me? Am I doing this right? It's not that meditation creates this chaos. It reveals it. For perhaps the first time, you're seeing the mechanism in action, the constant, compulsive story making that masquerades as reality. And at first, it's overwhelming. But if you continue to sit, to breathe, to watch without engagement, something shifts. The stories begin to lose their grip, not because you're forcing them away, but because you're no longer giving them the fuel of belief. You start to notice, oh, these are just thoughts. They arise and pass. They're not commands. They're not truths. They're just weather moving through consciousness. This is the beginning of freedom. Not freedom from the ego, but freedom from the tyranny of the ego. The difference is crucial. You don't need to kill the ego any more than you need to kill your left hand. You just need to stop believing. It's the only hand you have. In Zen, they tell a story. A monk asks his teacher, "What is the self?" The teacher holds up a fist, then opens his hand, empty. The self is both the fist and the opening. It's the gesture, not the thing. The activity, not the object. We spend our lives trying to solidify what was always meant to flow. Think about a river. It has a name. We point and say, that's the Mississippi. But what is the Mississippi? The water in it right now will be in the Gulf of Mexico tomorrow. The river is never the same water twice, yet we treat it as a permanent thing. You are like this, a process, not a product, a verb, not a noun. But the ego desperately wants to be a noun. It wants to be fixed, known, definable. I am an introvert. I am damaged. I am successful. I am unlovable. These statements feel like descriptions, but they're actually imprisonment. They're the ego drawing a circle around infinite possibility and saying this, only this. forever. But you are not a this. You are a flow of awareness taking temporary shape. And when the ego gets quiet, you feel this fluidity. You feel the way identity is actually porous, flexible, vast. You stop being so concerned with maintaining a consistent self-image. You stop defending positions that no longer serve you just because you held them yesterday. You become curious instead of certain. And paradoxically, this doesn't make you weak or undefined. It makes you more authentically yourself. Because the real you was never the rigid story. It was always the creative awareness generating the story. The mystics call this the true self. The Buddhists call it Buddha, nature. The Hindus call it Atman. Different words for the same recognition. Beneath the conditioned personality, there is something unconditioned. Something that was never born and will never die. Something that has been quietly watching your entire life unfold, unchanged by all of it. When the ego gets quiet, this is what remains. Not even a presence. Just awareness itself, clear, open, radically accepting. And from this space, the ego is revealed for what it always was, a beautiful, limited tool. Helpful for navigating the world of form and relationship. Essential, even, but not the author, not the source. You are the space in which the ego appears. And when you know this not intellectually, but as a lived reality, everything changes. The urgency fades. The constant need to prove, to achieve, to be seen, it doesn't disappear, but it loosens its grip. You can play the game of self without believing the game is all there is. You can have preferences without being defined by them. You can have goals without attaching your worth to their achievement. You can have a personality without mistaking it for your essence. This is maturity. Not in the conventional sense of being responsible and adult, but in the spiritual sense of recognizing, I am larger than my story. I contain multitudes. I am not bound by the character I've been playing. The Tao teaching says, the master arrives without leaving, sees the light without looking, achieves without doing. This sounds paradoxical until you understand. When the ego gets quiet, action continues, but it's no longer driven by lack, by the need to become, by the fear of not being enough. It flows from fullness, from presence, from the simple joy of being alive and expressing that aliveness through form. This is what we're all longing for, whether we know it or not. Not perfection, not achievement, not even happiness in the conventional sense. We're longing for the relief of no longer having to maintain the fiction, of no longer having to defend the castle of self against an imagined enemy. We're longing for the ego to get quiet so we can finally hear what's been true all along. You are not your thoughts. You are not your history. You are not even your consciousness. You are the openness in which all of it appears, the sky that holds every weather, the silence that makes every sound possible. And that has never needed fixing. It has never been broken. It is whole, complete, and sufficient exactly as it is. Right now, right here. Always, letting go of who you think you are. There's a kind of dying that happens long before the body stops. It's the death of who you thought you had to be. The death of the story you've been telling about yourself since childhood. The death of the strategies that once kept you safe but now only keep you small. This dying feels like loss. It feels like failure. The ego interprets it as catastrophe, but it's not death. It's molting. It's the snake shedding skin that no longer fits. The butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. The seed splitting open so the tree can grow. When the ego gets quiet, this process accelerates. And it terrifies us, because we have confused ourselves with our armor. We have mistaken the protective shell for the living creature inside. And now something is asking us to crack that shell open and emerge raw, vulnerable, new. Most people resist this their entire lives. They sense the invitation to transform, but the fear is too great, so they reinforce the shell. They double down on the story. They make themselves more rigid, more defended, more identified with the mask. And they wonder why they feel so hollow, why success doesn't satisfy, why achievement feels empty, why no matter how much they accumulate money, status, relationships, experiences, there's still this aching sense of, is this all there is? The Sufi poet Hafiz wrote, "The small man builds cages for everyone he knows, while the sage, who has to duck his head when the moon is low, keeps dropping keys all night long for the beautiful rowdy prisoners." You are both the small man and the prisoner. You are the one who built the cage of identity, and you are the one suffering inside it. When the ego gets quiet, you realize the door was never locked. You've been free all along. You just couldn't see it because the ego kept insisting the cage was protection, not confinement. This realization doesn't come through force. You cannot beat the ego into submission. You cannot shame yourself into awakening. The more you fight the ego, the stronger it becomes, because fighting is what the ego does best. It's built for conflict, for division, for the story of struggle. But you can starve it, not through deprivation, but through attention, by placing your attention somewhere else. The ego thrives on your identification with thoughts. Every time you believe a thought about yourself, you feed it. Every time you defend a position, justify a reaction, rehearse a grievance, you're giving the ego substance. But what if you just stopped? Not violently, not through suppression, just gently, repeatedly, choosing to rest your attention in the space before thought arises, in the breath, in the sensation of aliveness in your body, in the simple fact of being aware. At first, this feels like nothing. The ego dismisses it. This is boring. This isn't spiritual. I'm not getting anywhere. But getting somewhere is an ego project. Awakening is not an achievement. It's a recognition. And recognition doesn't happen in the future. It happens now, or not at all. The Zen masters were ruthless about this. When students came seeking enlightenment, seeking special experiences, seeking proof of their progress, the masters would sometimes hit them with a stick, not to punish, but to shock them into the present moment. Stop seeking. You are already what you're looking for. This is the hardest teaching to receive. Because the ego has spent your entire life convincing you that you're incomplete, that you need to become something other than what you are. That salvation, peace, worth all of it, lies somewhere in the future, contingent on doing the right things, having the right experiences, finally becoming good enough. When the ego gets quiet, this story collapses. And in the space where the story used to be, there's just this moment, this breath, this inexplicable fact of existence, prior to all interpretation. It's not blissful, necessarily. It's not even peaceful in the way we imagine peace. It's just real, unadorned, direct. And paradoxically, this directness is what we've been longing for all along. not the highs, not the spiritual experiences, not the transcendent states, but just the relief of being fully here, fully present, with nothing to prove and nowhere to go. The Christian mystics called this kenosis self-emptying. The Buddhists call it sunyata emptiness, not void, but openness, not absence, but fullness so complete it has no edges, no boundaries, no separation. You touch this every time the ego gets quiet. In moments of grief so total that thought stops. In moments of beauty so complete that the observer disappears. In moments of love so profound that there's no longer a you loving a them, there's just love moving through form, recognizing itself. These aren't special moments. They're glimpses of what's always true beneath the noise. But here's what the spiritual marketplace won't tell you: this recognition doesn't fix your life. It doesn't make your problems disappear. It doesn't grant you immunity from suffering. What it does is change your relationship to all of it. You still feel pain, but you're no longer at war with pain. You still have preferences, but you're no longer tyrannized by them. You still participate in the world, but you're no longer convinced the world is all there is. You become like water, not weak, but yielding, not passive, but responsive, moving through life without clinging, without hardening, without the constant need to prove you exist. The Tao Te Ching says, "The wise man does nothing, yet leaves nothing undone." This confused me for years. How can you do nothing and leave nothing undone? Then I understood: when the ego gets quiet, action continues. But it's no longer your action in the sense of a separate self-controlling events. It's just life living itself through this particular form. You still make choices, you still have responsibilities, but there's a lightness to it, a playfulness. Because you're no longer burdened by the weight of being a self that has to constantly maintain its existence through effort. Imagine living your entire life holding your breath, convinced that if you let go, you'll die. And then one day, you exhale, and the next breath comes by itself. And you realize it was always coming by itself. You never had to hold on. That's what it's like when the ego gets quiet. The holding releases. The grasping softens. And what remains is not nothing, it's everything. It's the natural intelligence of life itself, moving through you as you, without your interference. This is not enlightenment in the sense of some permanent state you achieve and then maintain. That's just another ego project. This is simpler and more ordinary. It's the continuous recognition that you are not the thinker of thoughts. You are the awareness in which thinking happens. And that awareness is already free. It has always been free. It cannot not be free, because freedom is its nature. When the ego gets quiet, even for a heartbeat, you remember this, not as a belief, but as a direct experience. And that remembering changes everything, even though nothing has changed. You're still you. You still have your personality, your history, your quirks and wounds, but you're no longer imprisoned by them. You're no longer defined by them. You can play the role without being consumed by the role. You can engage the story without believing the story is all you are. And from this space, life becomes what it always wanted to be: spontaneous, creative, free, not perfect, not pain-free. But authentic in a way that no amount of ego, building, or self-improvement could ever achieve. Because authenticity is not something you construct. It's what remains when you stop constructing. When the ego gets quiet, you don't become someone else. You become no one in particular. And that no one is finally, fully, radiantly alive. The practice of presence. So now what? You've glimpsed the silence beneath the noise. You've tasted the freedom of not being tyrannized by thought. You've recognized, if only for a moment, that you are not the story, but you're still here, in a body, in a world that demands participation, with bills to pay and relationships to navigate, and a mind that still, inevitably, produces thoughts. The question isn't how to transcend this. The question is, how do you live from silence while still engaging the world of form? This is where most spiritual teachings falter. They give you the insight, the recognition of your true nature, but they don't show you how to integrate. They make awakening sound like an exit strategy, a way to escape the messiness of being human. But that's not what the great mystics taught. When the Buddha awakened beneath the Bodhi tree, he didn't disappear into some transcendent realm. He got up, dusted himself off, and spent the next 40 years walking dusty roads, teaching, eating, interacting with difficult people. He still had a body. He still felt heat and cold. He still experienced pain. What changed wasn't his circumstances. What changed was his relationship to the experience of being alive. This is the art we must learn. Living from silence while dancing with form. Being rooted in the unchanging while flowing with the ever-changing. Recognizing the eternal while honoring the temporal. It sounds paradoxical because the mind tries to make it a concept. But it's not a concept, it's a lived reality, and it begins with something very simple. Noticing. Right now, as you read these words, there is awareness, not your awareness, not you. Being aware, just awareness itself, happening. And this awareness doesn't require effort. It doesn't require maintenance. It's already here. It's the constant, the background, the space in which everything appears. The ego lives in the foreground. It's the actor on the stage, the voice in your head, the one who's always doing, planning, remembering, anticipating. But when the ego gets quiet, the foreground and background reverse. Awareness moves to the center. And the drama of thought, emotion, sensation, all of it continues, but it's happening in you, not to you. This shift is everything. Because when you live identified with the foreground, with the content of experience, you're at the mercy of conditions. When things go well, you feel good. When things go poorly, you suffer. Your peace is contingent on circumstances, which means it's not peace at all, it's just temporary comfort. But when you live from the background, from awareness itself, you're no longer enslaved by the fluctuations. The waves still move, but you're the ocean. The weather still changes, but you're the sky. This doesn't make you indifferent. It makes you responsive instead of reactive. It makes you present instead of defended. A practical example, someone criticizes you. The ego immediately responds, how dare they? Don't they know who I am? I need to defend myself, explain, justify. The heart races. The mind spins. You're consumed by the reaction. But if you've been practicing living from silence, something different happens. The criticism lands. There's still sensation in the body, perhaps tightness in the chest, heat in the face. There's still thought, the mind offering its commentary. But there's also a pause, a space, a recognition. Oh, this is just a reaction. It's not me. It's not truth. It's just an old pattern running itself. And in that recognition, you have choice. You can respond instead of react. You can feel the sensations without being controlled by them. You can witness the thoughts without believing their commands. This is freedom. Not freedom from experience, but freedom within experience. The Stoics understood this. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But this isn't about positive thinking or controlling your responses. It's about recognizing that you are not your reactions. You are the space in which reactions arise. And when you know this not intellectually, but as a felt reality, reactions lose their grip. This doesn't happen overnight. The ego has been running the show for a long time. It has momentum, neural pathways, habits of identification that are deeply grooved. But every time you practice, every time you pause and return to awareness, every time you notice the story without being consumed by it, you weaken the ego's hold. Not through violence, but through a persistent redirection. It's like training a puppy. The puppy doesn't become obedient through punishment. It learns through repetition, through positive reinforcement, through patient, loving guidance. Your mind is the same. Every time you catch yourself lost in thought and gently return to presence, you're training a new pattern. A pattern of awareness instead of identification, of spaciousness instead of contraction. And gradually, something shifts. The gaps between thoughts grow wider. The silence becomes more palpable. The ego's voice, while still present, no longer feels like the only voice, or the loudest, or the most true. You begin to live from a deeper place, a place the world can't touch. Not because you've withdrawn from the world, but because you're no longer dependent on the world for your sense of okayness. This is what the mystics meant by being in the world, but not of it. You still participate. You still care. You still love and create and strive. But there's a quality of non-attachment. Not coldness, but freedom. You're no longer clinging to outcomes, to validation, to the constant need for things to be different than they are. The Bhagavad Gita teaches, you have a right to your actions, but never to the fruits of your actions. Act from fullness, not from lack. Create from joy, not from the need to prove. Love from overflow, not from the hunger to be filled. When the ego gets quiet, this becomes natural, because the ego is the source of all grasping. The ego is the one who's always reaching for more, better, different, always trying to complete itself through external means. But awareness is already complete. It lacks nothing. It needs nothing. It simply is. And when you live from this completion, your actions in the world become expressions of joy rather than attempts to fill a void. You create because creation is delightful. You love because love is your nature. You serve because service is fulfilling in itself, not because you're earning spiritual points. This is maturity. This is what it means to be fully human, not transcending humanity, but embodying it completely, with all its messiness and beauty and contradiction. A story from Zen, a student asks the master, "What did you do before enlightenment?" The master says, "I chopped wood and carried water." The student asks, "What did you do after enlightenment?" The master says, "I chopped wood and carried water." Same actions, same life. What changed was the one chopping and carrying. Before, there was a sense of burden, of, I have to do this. After, there was just chopping, just carrying, no separation between the door and the doing. no complaint, no resistance. Just life living itself. This is available right now. Not after you've meditated for 10,000 hours. Not after you've read all the books. Not after you've healed all your wounds or become a better person now. This moment. This breath. Because when the ego gets quiet, there is no past to regret and no future to fear. There is only now. And now is always enough. Now is always whole. You don't have to believe this. Just notice. Notice the awareness that's reading these words. Notice the space in which thoughts arise. Notice the silence between sounds. Notice the aliveness in your hands, your chest, your face. This noticing is not an activity. It's a recognition. A remembering. You are not who you think you are. You are not the accumulation of your experiences. You are not your successes or your failures, your virtues or your flaws. You are the awareness in which all of this appears. The unchanging witness, the silent observer who has been present through every moment of your life, unaffected by any of it. And when you know this, when you live from this, everything becomes lighter. Not because life gets easier, but because you're no longer adding the weight of resistance to what is. Pain still hurts. Loss still aches. But suffering the extra layer we add through our stories and resistance begins to fall away. And what remains is just life, raw, real, immediate, not always comfortable, not always pleasant, but deeply, profoundly alive. This is the gift of silence. Not that it makes you special or enlightened or somehow superior, but that it returns you to the simple, extraordinary fact of being. You are here. You are aware. You are alive. Everything else is commentary. When the ego gets quiet, you hear this truth, and in hearing it, you are freed. Not from life. Into life, into the fullness of what has always been, waiting beneath the noise. So let it be quiet. Let the voice settle. Let the stories rest. And meet yourself for the first time, and for the 1,000th time in the silence that has no name. In the space between thoughts, in the gap between breaths, you are not becoming. You are not arriving. You are simply, finally, awake to what you've always been. And that is enough. That has always been enough.